May 10th, 1897. A man is being dragged through the mountains of Cavite. He is wounded. His brother is dead. His wife has been beaten. And the men doing this to him, they are not Spanish soldiers. They are Filipinos. His Filipinos, the men he built a revolution for, the men who would not exist as a fighting force if not for him. Soon, this man is dead. His name is Andres Bonifacio. He started the Philippine Revolution, and the Philippine Revolution killed him. Tonight, we are telling the full story, the real story, not the sanitized version in your history textbook, the story of the Supremo, the most powerful man in the revolution, and how everything he built was used to destroy him. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will never see Philippine history the same way again. I'm Bella, and this is Pinas Unlimited, where we tell the stories of Filipino heroes the way they deserve to be told. Raw, complete, and without apology. Let's start. Before Andres Bonifacio was the Supremo, before he was a revolutionary, a legend, a name on a street sign, he was just a boy from Tondo, born on November 30th, 1863, in the heart of one of Manila's poor districts. No silver spoon, no Ilustrado bloodline, no Spanish-funded education waiting for him in Manila or Europe. His father was a local official. His mother, a woman of Chinese and Filipino descent. And when both of his parents died while he was still young, still a teenager, Andres did not fall apart. He became the parent. He raised his younger siblings himself. He made hats, fans, and canes, and sold them on the streets of Manila. He worked as a messenger and agent for Fleming and Company, a British trading firm, then later as a bodeguero, a warehouseman, for the German house of Fressel and Company. He was sharp, he was observant, and he was reading everything he could get his hands on. He read Jose Rizal's Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo, and felt every word like a blade. He read Victor Hugo's Les Miserables and recognized himself in Jean Valjean, a man crushed by a system that was never built for him. He read the lives of the presidents of the United States. He read about the French Revolution. He studied how oppressed people had fought back and won. Here is what you need to understand about Andres Bonifacio. Jose Rizal went to Madrid, to Paris, to Berlin. He moved in the circles of European intellectuals and Filipino elites. He wrote with the eloquence of a man who had been given every advantage. Bonifacio had none of that. He educated himself in the streets of Tondo, between shifts at the warehouse, by candlelight after his siblings were asleep. And that is precisely what made him dangerous. Because Rizal wrote for the Ilustrados, the educated class, the landowners, the professionals. He wrote to convince the Spanish that Filipinos deserved to be treated as humans. Bonifacio did not want to convince the Spanish of anything. He wanted to fight them. And he knew exactly which Filipinos would fight with him, because he was one of them. The workers, the poor, the forgotten, the ones with nothing to lose and everything to gain. He was 30 years old when he decided that the time for petitions was over. July 7th, 1892. Jose Rizal has just been arrested and exiled to Dapitan by the Spanish colonial government. For many Filipinos, this was the moment hope died. For Andres Bonifacio, it was the moment everything became clear. If the Spanish could exile the most brilliant, most internationally respected Filipino intellectual, a man who had done nothing but write and advocate peacefully, then there was no path forward through words, only through action. That same night, in a modest house just outside Intramuros, Bonifacio gathered a handful of trusted men. They lit a candle, they made a pact, and they founded the Katipunan. Its full name, Kataas-taasang, Kagalang-galangang Katipunan ng mga anak ng bayan, the highest and most honorable society of the children of the nation. In the beginning, there were fewer than a dozen members. They met in secret. They used aliases. They had passwords and coded letters and a hierarchy designed to protect every member, because discovery meant death. New members signed their oath in their own blood. Let that image sit with you for a moment. These were not soldiers. These were not trained fighters. These were workers, farmers, clerks, ordinary Filipinos who looked at their country, a country that had been colonized for over 300 years, and decided that enough was enough. And they bled for it, literally, before the revolution even began. The Katipunan grew slowly at first, then faster, then explosively. Within 4 years, membership had swelled from that original handful to more than 30,000 Filipinos across Luzon. 30,000 people keeping a secret from the most powerful colonial government in the region. Bonifacio's wife, Gregoria de Jesus, known as La Kambini ng Katipunan, the muse of the Katipunan, was herself a member. She kept the organization's documents, its seal, its most sensitive records. She was not a footnote in this story. She was essential to it. By 1896, the Katipunan was no longer a secret society. It was a nation waiting to be born, and then it was discovered. August 19, 1896. A Katipunan member confessed the organization's existence to a Spanish friar. Within hours, the colonial government was moving. Arrests were beginning. The clock was running out. Bonifacio had a choice: run and survive, or fight and risk everything. He called his men to Pugadlawin, a barrio in Caloocan. And on August 23, 1896, in what would become one of the most iconic moments in Philippine history, Bonifacio and his men pulled out their cedulas, their colonial tax certificates, the documents that legally marked them as subjects of the Spanish crown, and they tore them apart with their bare hands, shouting, "Matagal ng panahon na tayo'y alipin. Ngayon ay ipaglaban natin ang ating kalayaan. For too long we have been slaves. Today we fight for our freedom." The Philippine Revolution had begun. The revolution exploded across Luzon like fire across dry grass. Bonifacio led his forces in a series of attacks around Manila. He was not a trained military commander. He had no formal education in warfare, no European military academy behind his name. What he had was fire, and men who believed in him absolutely. On August 30th, 1896, Bonifacio led an attack on the San Juan del Monte powder magazine, a Spanish military depot on the outskirts of Manila. The goal was to seize weapons and ammunition and deal the Spanish a crippling blow. It failed. The Spanish were better armed and better positioned. Bonifacio's forces were repelled with heavy losses. It was his first major defeat, and the Spanish used it to paint him as an incompetent leader. But Bonifacio did not break. He retreated. He regrouped. He kept the revolution alive in the mountains of Morong and the plains of Bulacan, while other fronts opened across Luzon. And here is where the story becomes complicated. Because while Bonifacio was fighting and struggling in the hills near Manila, a young general in Cavite named Emilio Aguinaldo was winning. Victory after victory, town after town. Aguinaldo had military advantages that Bonifacio did not: better armed troops, experienced local commanders, and the backing of the wealthier Ilustrado class of Cavite. The contrast was stark. Bonifacio, founder of the revolution, leader of the masses, struggling in the field. Aguinaldo, wealthy local leader, military victor, darling of the educated elite. And slowly, quietly, the power inside the revolution began to shift. The ilustrados who had always looked down on Bonifacio, who had always seen this self-educated boy from Tondo as beneath them, began to gather around Aguinaldo. Bonifacio could feel it happening. And then came the Tejeros Convention, March 22nd, 1897. The revolutionary leadership, Katipunan commanders, local leaders, generals, gathered at the hacienda of Tejeros in Cavite. The official purpose was unity. The revolution needed a single organized government to replace the Katipunan's original structure. Elections would be held, officers chosen, a new revolutionary government formed. Bonifacio agreed to preside over the convention. He walked in as the Supremo, the founder and supreme leader of the entire revolution. He walked out as nothing. The votes were cast. Emilio Aguinaldo was elected president of the revolutionary government. Bonifacio, the man who had started all of this, was voted in as director of the interior. A cabinet position, a bureaucratic role, for the man who bled for this revolution. Bonifacio seemed ready to accept it, until Daniel Tirona stood up. Tirona, a Caviteño general, an Aguinaldo ally, rose from his seat and publicly declared that Bonifacio was not qualified to serve as director of the interior, that the position required a lawyer, that a man like Bonifacio, without formal education, without the right credentials, was simply not fit. In front of everyone, in front of every general, every commander, every man who had sworn an oath to the revolution that Bonifacio built. The room went silent. Bonifacio stood up, and he declared the entire convention invalid. He said the election was fraudulent, that proper procedures had not been followed, that he, as presiding officer, was nullifying the results, and he walked out. Imagine that moment. You started a revolution. You risked your life, your family, your freedom. You recruited 30,000 people to the cause. You tore your cedula with your own hands. And in a single afternoon, men in suits voted you out of your own revolution. Bonifacio went back to his camp and drafted the Acta de Tejeros, a formal document declaring the Tejeros Convention null and void, signed by his officers. For Aguinaldo's faction, this was the last straw. Bonifacio was now a threat, a man with his own army, his own loyalty base, his own legitimacy, and he was refusing to recognize their government. He had to be removed. On April 27, 1897, soldiers under the command of Colonel Agapito Bonzon, acting under orders from the new revolutionary government, arrived at Bonifacio's camp in Indang, Cavite. What happened next was not an arrest, it was an ambush. Bonifacio's brother Ciriaco was shot and killed. Bonifacio himself was shot in the arm and stabbed in the throat. His wife Gregoria was dragged away and assaulted. And Andres Bonifacio, wounded, bleeding, watching his brother die, was put in chains by the revolution he started. The trial was a formality. Bonifacio was charged with treason against the revolutionary government, sedition, conspiracy to undermine the republic. He stood before judges appointed by the very government that had just had him arrested. He had no real legal counsel. The outcome was predetermined. Bonifacio argued his own defense. He said this court had no legitimate authority over him, that he had not committed treason, he had committed the revolution, that the Tejeros Convention was fraudulent, and therefore the government prosecuting him did not legally exist. He was right. It didn't matter. He was found guilty, sentenced to death. For a brief moment, there was hope. Emilio Aguinaldo signed a commutation, changing the sentence from death to exile. For one day, Andres Bonifacio was going to live. Then, Aguinaldo's advisors got to him. They argued that a living Bonifacio was too dangerous, that he had too much loyalty, that exiling him would only delay the problem, that for the revolution to survive, their revolution, the one they were now controlling, Bonifacio had to be eliminated permanently. Aguinaldo reversed his decision. On May 10, 1897, Andres Bonifacio and his surviving brother Procopio were taken deep into the mountains of Maragondon, Cavite. They were executed. Andres Bonifacio was 33 years old. No monument marked the spot. No official ceremony was held. The new revolutionary government did not announce his death publicly for weeks. They buried him in the mountains and tried to move on. But you cannot bury a man like Andres Bonifacio. History will not allow it. For decades after his death, Bonifacio was a footnote. While José Rizal was elevated as the national hero, his face on the peso, his execution site a national shrine, his novels required reading in every Filipino school, Bonifacio was left in the margins. There are historians who believe this was deliberate, that the Ilustrado class who took over the revolution, and later, the American colonial government that replaced the Spanish, preferred a hero who used a pen over one who used a bolo, a hero who asked politely, not one who fought back. Today, November 30th, Bonifacio's birthday, is a national holiday in the Philippines. His face is on the 10-centavo coin, the smallest coin in circulation. Some Filipinos say even that is a statement. The debate has never fully ended. Scholars, students, historians, they still argue about whether Bonifacio, not Rizal, should be the Philippine national hero. Whether the man who actually started the revolution deserves more than a holiday and the smallest coin. But here is what I believe. Rizal gave us his pen, his brilliance, his sacrifice on the execution field at Bagumbayan. Bonifacio gave us something different. He gave us the belief, the radical, dangerous, revolutionary belief, that ordinary Filipinos, poor Filipinos, Filipinos from Tondo with no education and no money and no powerful family could look an empire in the eye and not blink. That belief did not die in the mountains of Maragondon. It is still here, in every Filipino who refuses to be told they are less than. In every Filipino who fights for what is right, even when the system is against them. In every Filipino who tears up the document that says they don't belong and builds something better with their bare hands. Andres Bonifacio lives in all of us. He always will. Andres Bonifacio was not a perfect man. No hero is. But he was completely, unapologetically, fiercely Filipino, in a way that this country has never fully honored. And that is exactly why we tell stories like this one on Pinas Unlimited. Because these heroes deserve more than a paragraph in a textbook. They deserve the full story. If this video moved you, if you learned something, felt something, on behalf of a man who died 127 years ago, share this video. Send it to a Filipino friend. Post it in your group chat. Let's make sure the story of Andres Bonifacio reaches every Filipino who needs to hear it. And before you go, I want to hear from you. Do you think Andres Bonifacio should be the Philippine national hero instead of José Rizal? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If you're new here, subscribe. Every week on Pinas Unlimited, we go deep into the stories of the heroes who built this nation. Next week, we are telling the story of Antonio Luna, the general so brilliant, so dangerous, so impossibly Filipino, that they had to kill him too. You do not want to miss that one. I'm Bella. This is Pinas Unlimited. Hanggang sa muli, until next time.